On a very special edition of the Kauffman Corner podcast this week, we will dive into pitching. Oh boy, are people fired up? With us as always, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, of course, co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, co-author of Rob and Rany on the Royals, author of Rany on the Royals. Good to be with you, Rany. How are you, my friend?
I am doing well, Soren.
Good.
I want to send a special shout out and thank you to Dayton Moore for giving us some content for
Yeah.
tonight's episode because I woke up this morning, I wasn't entirely sure how we were going to fill an hour of content. And then Dayton Moore very, very graciously gave
Yeah.
us something very, very interesting to talk about.
He did indeed. He did indeed. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. You can catch my work at 810WHB.com and The Athletic. Our old friend, former Royals writer, Alec Lewis, contributed on a piece along with Rustin Dodd, who, by the way, I'm going to have a little plug for my radio show. We'll have Rustin Dodd on, I think it is Tuesday. Tuesday or is it tomorrow? I don't know. I can't remember which. One or the other. We're going to be talking to Rustin Dodd. I'll have to check with Adam, and we're gonna have him on. He's one of the authors, and Andy McCullough. Three guys that have covered the Kansas City
Mhm.
Royals, but cover them no more. Were the ones that authored a piece for the Athletic that had the Royals talking about it. Dayton Moore on the pregame show before one of the games, interviewed by Ryan Lefevre, was reacting to this. We react to it and his comments now. First of all, Randy, let's just start with what was your reaction to the piece when you saw it?
So the article itself, I was absolutely delighted when it entered my Twitter feed, and it was everything I could have hoped for when I read it. Right, this was for one thing. Let's start by the fact that it was written by Alec Lewis, Rustin Dodd, Andy McCullough. These are not, you know, carpetbaggers who come to Kansas City and write a trash expose of, flyover country from their perch on the coast. Yes, Rustin and Andy live on the coast, but they covered the Royals for several years. Alec was in town until just a few weeks ago. Between the three, we're talking about three guys who have essentially covered the Royals continuously, going back to 2014. And Rustin was with the Star for years before that. So these are guys who know this organization intimately, who knew it when they were at their best, and they did not write this article lightly. This article was not an expose or this is not a TMZ clickbait piece of something people didn't already know. This was an article that attempted to explain what we already knew, that the Royals pitching staff is terrible, and to explain why. And it was, I think, very well resourced. There were lots of quotes, both from scouts outside the organization as well as from examples from players and coaches that are within the organization. This was a meaty article. This was not a lot of speculation. This was fact-based, despite whatever Dayton Moore may have said today. And the comments and the facts in the article are pretty damning. That the Royals do not know how to develop pitching. They may not know how to identify pitching in the draft, and it explains why they are at the bottom of the major leagues in terms of pitching performance this season. I mean, when you see a quote in the article, if these stud pitchers, Kowar, Lynch, Singer, all these guys, had they been Dodgers or Rays or Guardians, they would be very, very good, said one rival pro scout. Now, take Singer out of that because Singer is very good. And Singer is, of course, there's always an exception to prove the rule. And let's give the Royals all due credit for what Brady Singer is. But Kowar is a broken pitcher in AAA who has an ERA in the majors, career ERA of 10.6. And you have rival scouts saying if he were drafted by a different organization, he would be a quality major league pitcher. And that really says all you need to know, that other organizations have figured out how to develop pitching. The Royals have not. And they seem to be at least 10 years behind the times in terms of the techniques that they're using, the uh, the skills that they emphasize are out of date. Uh, the drills that they use are obsolete, and they seem to be unwilling to admit that they need to change. All of this is extremely damning. None of it is surprising.
Right. And I think the reaction to it by Dayton Moore, the fact that he is addressing it, I think speaks to the fact that it hits close to home. That
Hmm.
they're aware that this hits the mark. They're aware that there are problems, and I think that they're probably under heat from ownership. And I've stated this a number of times on this podcast. It's different having an owner who's sitting down in Arkansas and having owners, plural, that live here in Kansas City that perhaps listen to my radio show, consume this podcast, read the Athletic, read the Kansas City Star, that they're in and around the community, and they're in and around and surrounded by Royals fans. And so I definitely think the environment is different with which Dayton Moore and J.J.Piccolo and the front office and the coaching staff works in. The ownership is here. And while I don't think in any way, shape, or form is John Sherman a meddling owner, he's here. I mean, he's at the
Hmm.
ballpark, right?
Right.
He's not just coming in for a game from time to time with his kid running around the office going, "Hey guys, what's going on?" Right? Like, which was kind of the impression that we all had of how it worked with the glasses. Um, that being said, um, there are a couple of things. I think that I want to dive into the part about Dayton Moore bristling about unnamed sources,
Hmm.
right? Like, where do you stand on that? Where do you stand on whether or not a piece can be? It certainly can be written, right? We have, at least for now, freedom of speech and freedom, in the journalistic community to write whatever you want. So the Athletic has the right to do it. I think very important to note, as you said, three incredible writers, all of them. Of, collectively a lot accomplished amongst all three of these guys that have been around the team, covered the team, and covered baseball. So this isn't, a couple of guys taking a shot from the right field GA after they got done, uh, I don't know, preparing someone's taxes, right? Although that's what we do. And are we any more qualified? I'd like to think so. Your credentials, Baseball Prospectus, so on and so forth, covering the team for a long time. But the unnamed source is how you get information, right? Like, the people will tell you things. I have people tell me things. They don't want their name out there. I have people within organizations tell me things that they, in their mind, do they ever tell me anything that is going to harm the organization? No. Do they tell me things that they don't really want it coming from them, but they think, hey, for me to do my job for the fans, it's important for the fans to understand why certain things are going on. Yes, they will tell me things, but they don't want their name out there as to who's saying it. Now, I will say this from the Royals' perspective, I'm trying to think, for the most part, everything that's ever said by the Kansas City Royals they operate a little bit differently. You could pretty much attribute anything that's ever told you to exactly who it is. They don't really do off the record. So I think, and that's great. And I think their honesty and their availability is special. And I think it's one of the reasons why I root for the organization. I think they're a very honest and upfront group. But I do think to get information, at times you have to protect sources, right? That's the way it works. People will tell you that, well, listen, I don't want to go on the record with it, but here's what's going on. Here's what happened to me, but listen, I don't want it to come back and backfire on me. That's just the way the world works. And if you don't like it, I think it's probably, I think the ones that hurt are quote unquote former players, right? And former minor leaguers. Those are the ones that hurt. I think they want to portray it as it's the other people in baseball that are unnamed, that they don't think that that's fair. But I think in reality, the hurt is that you've got guys that you invested time, energy, money, and resources on that are now firing out at you. I understand that would hurt, that it doesn't feel good. But if it's a reality, there's no reason to be upset towards the authors, the publication, for putting the information out there. If that's what these people are actually saying, who said it is frankly irrelevant. The fact that it's a former player, and based on the people that are writing it, I know it is a former player. Which one? I don't know. I can take a couple of guesses. I got a pretty good idea on one of them that's involved. Um, but I think that's the thing that for the Royals, I really hope that after the initial pain is done and the reaction, that they take this article to heart and say, we got to change. Like, everybody around the industry of baseball knows we've got issues and we've got to fix them.
Yeah, I would hope so. The fact that he made these comments, 3 days after the article came out, That's disappointing because I think he had enough time to digest this. They should have been beyond the initial emotional response.
Well, let me just say that I get that, but Dayton Moore didn't call a press conference and make this announcement. Dayton Moore was asked this question in a pregame.
That's true. That's
so
true.
he can't answer it till he's asked it.
Right. But he should have. I feel like when he was asked it, that he's had time to digest it, that he's a professional enough to know. He should be professional enough to know how journalism works. This idea that, because the sources are anonymous, that somehow that undermines the credibility of the journalism. The foundation of journalism for the last 300 years is unnamed sources. And I think, let me give the exact quote here. Anytime somebody does something anonymously, first of all, I think it's disrespectful, lacks integrity. And I think most of those comments come from somebody criticizing simply with a critical spirit. And so that's the full quote here. It goes on from there. But I think when you isolate that quote, I almost feel like Dayton the point he is making is very valid when we are talking about sort of a moral code to live by. And we know obviously Dayton, his religion is very important to him. My religion is very important to me. And speaking about somebody behind their back, backbiting is something that is, I think he and I would agree, is something that people should avoid doing. But there's a difference between talking crap about your neighbor behind their back and speaking truth to power. And that's what journalism ultimately is, right? It is criticizing people in positions of power, whether it's political power, whether it's the president, or whether it's a general manager of a baseball team. Criticizing people who have power over you is something that's very difficult to do if you are not granted anonymity. And the rules for public figures are different. And if people were out there anonymously criticizing Dayton Moore as a person, as a neighbor, as a husband, as a father, absolutely out of bounds. They're criticizing his ability to develop pitchers for a baseball team. That is fair game. And he has to know that that's fair game. So I think you've got to differentiate people talking behind your back and people saying things freely on matters of your competence as a competence at your job and competence as a job in a public facing position. That is not a critical spirit. And what really bothers me is the comments that he made here. Let me get the exact quote again. Of course, we had a lot of people in the organization disappointed in that piece because it wasn't factual. And this is the one that really set me off. Because if Dayton Moore thinks that the problem with this piece is that it's not factual, then let's just talk straight facts. All right. The Royals are 58 and 89. That is a fact. Right. They are last in the league in runs allowed. That is a fact. They are last in the league in hits allowed by something like 80 hits more than any other team. That is a fact. They are third, I believe, fourth in the league, fourth most home runs allowed, which is kind of incredible when you consider the ballpark they play in. That's a fact. Dead last in the league in walks allowed. That is a fact. They are second from the bottom in the American League in strikeouts. That is a fact. The only team ahead of them or behind them, depending on how you put it, the only team who has struck out fewer batters, the Detroit Tigers. And it is a fact that the Detroit Tigers fired their general manager this year. So regardless of what you think about this article, the facts are damning. This article is not trying to present facts or alternative facts or present. It is trying to explain why the facts that are not in dispute have come to be. They are a blueprint for how to fix things. If you have the humility to admit the facts that we know and ask yourself why those facts are facts in the first place. Why? No one can deny the Royals pitching is terrible. And this article didn't get into enough detail, maybe some of the minor league stuff, but the minor league data, the facts at the minor league level are just as bad as the major league level. Those facts are not in dispute. So the question is, how do you fix it? And if somebody offers suggestions on how to fix it, and your response is you're a critical spirit, and you're not speaking factual stuff. And what's the other quote that was in here, that so I just kind of let it go in one ear and out the other, then you're not seriously trying to fix the problem. You're not willing to even admit there is a problem. And that is the most troubling part of all of this.
And I think, and again, I'll come back to the fact that I believe the reaction from Dayton Moore, and again, he was asked the question. I want to be clear. He didn't call a press conference to say, I'm going to hammer this. Now, he has a lot of control over the broadcast, and he does a regular weekly appearance on the pregame with Ryan Lefevre. And so it just rolled around that's when it is. You know, I don't know. I haven't talked to Ryan, and frankly, Ryan probably wouldn't tell me, to be honest with you, whether or not Dayton said, "Hey, ask me about this. I want to get this off my chest. I want to talk about it." I know in talking to Dayton Moore in the past, whenever there's been a subject, I've said to him, "Listen, Dayton, I want you to know this is coming." I do this with anyone. If I think there's something that's going to be kind of a jolt or a shock to the system, I want them to know it's coming. I don't want to be like, "Oh, you're on the radio live now, and here, when did you stop beating your wife?" That's not what I that's not what I that's not what I do.
Sure.
And so, but I can tell you that Dayton Moore has always said to me, "Okay, I got it. I appreciate the heads up, but yeah, whatever you want to ask." J.J.Piccolo, same thing. I mean, I want to stress that they're not the kind of people to run from a problem. They're not. They don't do that. And I understand the frustrations of fans right now, and a lot of fans are ready for a change, and it may be time for a change. But I think it is important to note that these are not the people that will run from something. And J.J.Piccolo is quoted in the article. He obviously has spoken with these people, and I've never had a difficult time in talking to J.J.Piccolo. In fact, I've had people on the PR side of late. I don't want to try. I don't want anyone to throw someone under the bus, but I've reached out directly. I've had them try to not make it happen, and I reach out directly, and they've always gotten back to me. And there was even a time this year with Dayton Moore where I said, "Hey, listen, you're making comments, then you need to make comments everywhere." And the initial was that, no, he's not going to be available. And Dayton made himself available. I think that's important to understand what we're dealing with these people. These are stand-up professionals that do not run from criticism. Okay, they do not run from mistakes or bad things. I do think that's important to note. But I think this one hits close to home because they know it's true, right? They know that they've got problems. They know they're behind they're behind on where they should be, and have not delivered on the pitching. And I think they believed in past, their past way of doing things so much, and thought it was going to work, and they've resisted the change and the evolution of the game, and that's been a problem for them. And so, this one, I get it. This one's gonna, hurt for them, and the question is, to me, moving forward, can they fix it? Have they fixed it? Have they come around? Are they now up on spin rate? Are they now up on it? You can't just teach guys to be fastball, curveball guys, and I do think there's a point in there, like some of the talk about, well, this one minor leaguer said they would only, he had to throw a fastball in these counts. I've had conversations with them. Like I've had conversations. Who's the, of course, stats here, it'll jog my memory, but reliever Josh Staumont, was not doing what he needed to do to be effective. And I know that they sent him down, and I don't know if he's the guy that was on 1-1, you got to throw this pitch, or 2-2, but I know they sent him back with the edict. Listen, rearing back and just throwing your fastball is not going to work at this level. They will hit it. And Josh Staumont just wouldn't turn the corner on that. And that's why he ended up in the bullpen. That happens with every organization, right? With every organization that happens. I think at the end of the day, what this piece is it puts in print by people who have covered the team the bad track record that they have. 3 starting pitchers is all they have developed under Dayton Moore's watch. That's it. And I don't want to hear about, well, they traded so-and-so. Well, you're supposed to trade people. Like that, that's not a mulligan, right? And then fine, give me the guys you acquired in trades that went on to be stud starting pitchers, because you don't have that either. And so that's what's frustrating for the fans. The bottom line is just win, baby. Right? You're not winning. And so then the conversation becomes about why aren't you winning? You quickly arrive on the pitching side of things, and it's undeniable where they are. And I think the problem is they were a little bit drunk on the success of the championship. I think they really did. And the piece details it very well. It gives them credit for basically reinventing the game, to a degree, as much as you can
Sure.
reinvent the game. But the power bullpen, they are the ones who showed the way, and they won a championship, rightfully so. Flags fly forever. It will never be taken down. And you know, but I think they rested on their laurels, and they just decided that was the way. And I don't think Dayton Moore had a bad plan when he drafted Asa Lacy that night on the Zoom. He said, "Well, power pitching is what we need, and it's what we're building around, and you have to draft it. We can't sign it as a free agent." Okay, but you can't develop it either, and that's the reality of it. And when Asa Lacy is in flames and stalled at this point, it's you have to be asking his ownership, are we going in the right direction with these people?
The way to look at this article, the Royals are looking at this article as as a trash piece, as something, as dirt being thrown on the organization, and they're looking at it all wrong. This article is an intervention. It is a bunch of friends coming around to the guy who's down in the dumps and being like, "Dude, you've got to turn your life around. You've got to admit to a problem. You have a problem.
Dude,
we're here to help.
Cocaine is not breakfast. You have
right.
to stop." Yeah, right.
The eye opener in the morning has got to go. This is not the way to live your life. And that's why I think it does matter that the people who wrote this article, who signed their name to it, you want to talk about anonymous sources, like, this is not, the article was not anonymous. This is not like that that Chiefs article over the offseason that claimed to have inside knowledge on what happened at halftime at the AFC Championship game, signed by the Grand Poobah of Chiefs Kingdom or whatever. This was signed by Andy McCullough, Rustin Dodd, and Alec Lewis. So those sources are as good as those three guys say they are. They put their names on it. The Athletic, which, yes, is a new publication, but I think is an extremely well-respected publication, now owned by the New York Times.
Right.
Like, this is not the same as some, random blogger publishing under a pseudonym. These are people who have covered this organization, who probably are friends with people in the organization, both players and coaches and maybe front office type, who are saying, "Hey, you have a problem. We need you to admit you have a problem." The first step to fixing a problem is to admit you have it. And the initial response, and yes, it's an emotional response, and maybe it wasn't as well thought out as it could have been, wasn't premeditated perhaps, but still, the initial response to somebody coming to the Royals and saying you have a problem is to deny you have a problem. It's not a good look. And like you said, I think it's because it does hit so close to home, because the facts are undeniable. They have to know that. They do know that. What I also think is kind of interesting, though, is that you mentioned J.J.Piccolo, is on some level, some of the things that Dayton is saying contrasts with some of the things that J.J.Piccolo says. Like, it's interesting that the article starts with a quote from J.J.Piccolo saying, "I'd be lying if I said this is what we expected. We thought we'd have a better record right now." Like, that, at least right there, is a greater admission that they have been a disappointment than anything Dayton Moore said. The other thing Dayton Moore said, defending his team, is, as I mentioned before, the time that we have with these pitchers, the growth that we're seeing, and I don't think anybody who watches this game and understands this game feels like our pitchers have peaked out. Well, 5 days ago, J.J.Piccolo was on radio and was talking about Chris Bubich and Daniel Lynch. And he has a quote that says that the two pitchers, quote, "are getting to points in their careers where it's in their hands. We're being patient, but they're going to have to take control of their careers. Those two are a big part of our future, and they need to get better." I mean, on the one hand, you've got Dayton saying, "Oh, the best is yet to come." But J.J.Piccolo is acknowledging on some level that the best has to come. Like that these guys need to get better. And there's, I think, a little bit more urgency in the tone of what JJ was saying, a little bit more of acknowledgement that the status quo is not acceptable. And I just find it interesting that those two, some of their quotes do not seem to be on the same page. I'm personally, can't be a little bit more, uh, aggressive about fixing the problem. I think JJ is on the right track, at least acknowledging that there is a problem and that, the time for excuses is over, both for the pitchers, but also for the organization. But I do find that interesting.
I think it is of note. I think it also could be as simple as JJ's drilling down to the specifics of two guys, and Dayton is talking about the volume of young pitchers that they have. It's undeniable that it has not worked at the big league level. It is also undeniable that there was a pandemic that made it more difficult for everybody, but it's the same pandemic that 29 other clubs were forced to
Right.
deal with. So it is, some probably dealt with it better than others. Okay. The thing that to me is I think J.J.Piccolo, I think they might have been a couple of years late in making that move. Right. And to your point about them, coming at it a little bit different. J.J.Piccolo, it was said that it took 10 or 12 days of convincing on Dayton Moore for J.J.Piccolo, who first came up with the idea of changing hitting coaches with Terry Bradshaw, and he had to convince Dayton Moore, right? That's been acknowledged by everybody out there. So I think it's clear that J.J.Piccolo has what we absolutely know is J.J.Piccolo is more in tune with making changes, right? That's
Right.
what that's been confirmed. So I do think that is an intriguing part of this. We also know that changes are already underway, right? And J.J.Piccolo was named general manager about a year ago? Was it this time last year? Changes are already underway. We talked about it last week that Simon Tachi's out, and presumably there's going to be sweeping changes, right? I don't think anybody. The question isn't to me whether or not Cal Eldred's going to be back. It's whether or not Mike Matheny falls on that sword with him, right? Like that's the question. Is Matheny saying no, he's my guy? Then Matheny's going to go too. I don't think there's any way Cal Eldred's back. I think there'll be sweeping changes throughout. The question that the ownership has to decide is: are they the guys to make the change? Right? Like that's really what this all comes down to. Like, okay, we've identified that you're not getting things done, but do you now know where you need to get to? And can you get us there? Right? Like, okay, you got lost, but is the GPS working now? Like, are we going to get to where we need to get to? I think that's the real question. Otherwise, you can't invest the money you're investing to keep picking the wrong players, to keep having no ability to develop them. And I think that's the next question is, and I don't think it's on the three writers or anybody to come to this conclusion. The Royals have to figure it out. What we've been asking all along: are they picking the wrong guys? Well, according to this, they pick bad fastball guys.
Right. That's the other part of this. Is the question is, up until now, you and I have been talking about pitcher development. There's the quote here. There, here we have a coach saying they did a good job of getting the college performers in that draft because that was the model for let's get these guys to the big leagues quick. Part of what I think they missed on was a lot of those guys had bad fastballs, like they had below average pitch metrics on their pitchers. That is a new piece of information. I've heard a little bit of rumblings before this, but that really crystallizes that maybe some of the guys that they have been focusing on, maybe the Daniel Lynch's and Jackson Kowar's and Chris Bubich's, maybe part of the failure is that their fastballs, the velocity is there, but the movement, the type of movement that teams want, advanced teams when it comes to pitching development, the Dodgers and the Rays, et cetera, they want those pitchers with rise on their fastballs up in the zone, to change batters' eye levels. And that matters. The amount of spin that you're getting there matters more than velocity. And maybe those guys were not the right guys to take. I think it's a mix. I mean, I know Jackson Kowar, for instance, I actually had this discussion on Twitter with Kyle Body from Driveline, who is somebody in the public domain whose opinions I value highly, and was worked with major league teams. And he even said that Kowar was a guy he really was high on, and really cannot explain the failure there. And I will also say that these guys maybe they were never going to succeed. But these guys succeeded in the minor leagues up to and including AAA. So the fact that they've made it that far and only then fell on their face, I still think a lot of this is development. I still think those guys in a different organization, they could have had their fastballs adjusted at some point to be better. But the point to take away from this is that it's not one simple thing. It's not simply, oh, they don't teach how to throw a slider. It's everything. They're not on the cutting edge when it comes to identifying pitching talent, and they're not on the cutting edge of developing that talent, whether it comes to the drills that they use, whether it comes to the flexibility, the one size fits all. That's the one thing that has kind of plagued the Royals ever since Dayton Moore got here, I feel like, is the one size fits all mentality of every pitcher has to be developed in a certain way, that there are certain immutable laws of how to develop a pitcher. And this goes all the way back to Bill Fisher, who's a legendary pitching coach that Dayton Moore brought over from the Braves, been in the game for a very long time. And that's that's a
By the way,
double-edged
the
sword.
late Bill Fisher, we should point out that any comments we're going to make, the man is not with us to defend himself.
And
not
not
that you're skewering him, but I will tell you, he happy guy was. He's a peach.
The point I want to make is simply he's well known. I mean, this is something nobody would deny. He had his 4 pitching absolutes. 1, this is all pitchers. How to develop young pitchers. Rule number 1: don't bang your heel. It was always about heel bangers it's bad. Always land on your toes. 2, throw 4-seam fastballs. 3, don't pitch across your body. 4, right-handers throw from the right side of the rubber. Left-handers throw from the left side of the rubber. And my point is simply that if you look at Major League Baseball in 2022 and you look at winning teams, none of these rules are absolute. No, you look at Dodgers, not every right-handed pitcher throws from the right side of the rubber. Not everybody throws 4-seam fastballs. Not everybody doesn't bang their heel. Yes, these are general rules, but the inflexibility, I think, has not served the Royals well when it comes to developing their pitchers. And I think the Royals are coming around to this. They have loosened up their rules for certain pitchers over the years. I think they're a little bit more flexible. But then the third point about their failure to develop pitchers is the comments in the story about how a lot of their pitchers don't feel like they're getting the information that they need or that they want in many cases on their own pitching development in order to succeed. The Royals are not giving their pitchers the tools that they need. Some pitchers don't want those tools. Some pitchers, frankly, don't have the mental aptitude to handle it. But for those that do, to deprive them of information that they could use is just an unforced error. So there are many different ways that the Royals could improve their pitching development. And, and when there's so many things, I'm not sure that this is something that can be fixed with the same people in charge that they have now.
2015, they win the World Series. 11 pitchers appeared in the postseason for them. I will list all 11. Edinson Volquez, I guess this is in order of how's this ranked? I don't know how it's ranked. By strikeouts, just randomly came up. Edinson Volquez, Kelvin Herrera, Yordano Ventura, Johnny Cueto, Wade Davis, Chris Young, Ryan Madsen, Danny Duffy, Chris Medlin, Luke Hochevar, and Franklin Morales. Those were the 11 pitchers that they rode to a world championship. 4.
I was counting them. Yep, 4 were developed from the organization.
And so that's not just starting pitching. That's pitching in general. The whole, this concept that the bullpen was all their guys rocking and rolling. No, there were 4 guys. The 4 guys, Kelvin Herrera was theirs. Yordano Ventura was theirs. Danny Duffy was theirs. And Luke Hochevar was theirs. And, that's significant. And I think the part that the Royals, the championship was great and they earned it. And I, even as much, were they lucky? We just had our buddy Joe Sheehan here in KC. You and Joe came in last week or a couple weeks ago now. And I still bristle at that. No, they were not lucky. What they did in those years. But are they an organization that's got it all figured out? Clearly not. Clearly not. They've had 3 winning seasons in 16 years at the helm. So clearly not. I mean, you can, maybe it's a battle of semantics to say it's not luck. But I think the one thing that they failed to do was acknowledge what their shortcomings were, even on the way to a championship. And then the championship said, no, everything that we do is correct. They were battling. If you go back to, I don't remember what the year was when they had the farm system was loaded. Remember, it was the top farm system in baseball, and it's when Hosmer and Moustakas were down in the minor leagues. They were also Christian Colon in the top 100, in the Baseball America top 100. They had Hosmer, Moustakas, and Christian Colon was one of the guys. And they had a fourth position player, which I'm drawing a
I think
blank.
was it Will Myers?
It was probably Will Myers,
Yeah.
right? It was Will Myers. They had 5 pitchers. My
5.
recollection is that it was 9 guys, and I
Yes,
just
it
thought of
was
this now.
Duffy, Mike Montgomery, John Lamb, Chris Dwyer,
Yes.
and was it
Jake
Jake Odorizzi? Yeah.
Jake Odorizzi.
I have the. I'm looking at the Baseball America. I have that article, the cover
Right.
of those 9 guys posing on the cover. Basically, it's still on my wall.
Okay.
Yep.
So that came out, and in that time, and then that parlayed into the championship. But of those pitchers, go through the pitchers again. Danny Duffy, contributed. In that 2015 World Series, Danny Duffy was 1-0 with a 6 ERA, 6 innings, 7 hits, 4 runs, 4 earned. Gave up 2 homers, struck out 9 and walked none.
And the important thing is he was pitched out of the bullpen.
He pitched out of the bullpen.
The only the Royals won 2 pennants in a World Series, and they had 1 guy internally developed who made a start for them
and that was
either playoffs. Yordan Ventura is the only guy who was developed by the team who started a playoff game.
And we know that Luke Hochevar, while pitching very well in that postseason, 2-0 with a 0 ERA, 10 2/3, 6 hits, no runs, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts, 4 strikeouts and 10 2/3. He was not the Wade Davis guy. Pitt, did his job, right? And I like Luke Hochevar, the guy, a lot, and I'm glad he's got a championship ring. And it was a bumpy ride for a good man who took a lot of crap, rightfully so. But 1-1 giving you that, like, he's a failed starting pitcher. They failed to develop him as a starting. Nobody has taken 1-1 as a starting pitcher with the idea that he'll be a good setup guy when we get there. That's why the Asa Lacy comment.
Right. I was about to say, not even Asa Lacy.
That he's going to be part of a championship, staff. We just don't know if it's going to be a starter or reliever is enough to make you lose your mind. But they seem to then go, okay, we got it. And they didn't really understand, well, you got it. You really nailed it on this bullpen thing, but you even were, you kind of pieced it together with smoke and mirrors on the pitching as far as the starting pitching goes. And to their credit, I think they said, okay, we're going to invest in that. We're going to go get the dominant pitching. And I hope, my fear is that there was a little bit of we can't develop pitching. Okay, I'll show you. Let's go get pitchers and we'll show them. I felt like the plan was, listen, we can't just run back what we did before because everyone's hit for the bullpen thing now, right? So everybody's got power arms back there. So we've got to find a different way to do it. And they said, we have to bring starting pitching through the system because we're not going to buy it. And so that's what I assume they were doing, is that they were looking at it saying, okay, this is where the value is missing. But even when we go back to those guys, they were sparring with John Lamb and Mike Montgomery on their throwing programs all the way back then, right? Those were long toss guys. I remember going to spring training in Arizona. They have a thing where they bring all the general managers and the managers out, and they all come to one location. I think it's at like the Biltmore now, or the Phoenician, or one of them. The first couple of years, it was at the Diamondbacks ballpark. But they bring them all out, and you can talk to them. And I remember talking to Terry Francona and I think it was Shapiro, was the Indians GM then, and talking to him about, they had just brought in who's the guy who's suspended from baseball? UCLA. Trevor Bauer. They just brought in Trevor Bauer. Word was he was a huge pain in the ass. Clearly is. It was a huge pain in the ass about his throwing program. And there are books, and I'm reading through one of them. We've talked about it. The one that's how to build better players and
the MVP machine.
Yep. Yeah, MVP machine, and it talks about Trevor Bauer. There's a whole chapter on him and how he's finding through things. And they're like, listen, we just want good pitchers, right? And if he has a throwing program that he wants, we're willing to do it. And the Royals, meanwhile, had told their guys, don't do the long toss. And they had one of them, I forget which one it was, that was going through their pitching program at the facility, then would go do his pitching program on top. Right? I think it was John Lamb, and I think that's how he ended up towards Tommy John. If I'm mistaken, it was Mike Montgomery. But, I mean, they've always been sideways with their pitchers. Pitchers that wanted to do it a different way, and they wanted to wanted them to do it exactly this little cookie cutter approach that they have. And so there's no way, if they didn't learn the lesson from back then, why would they be learning the lesson right now? That's what I'm the most interested in. Is John Sherman has to decide, are these guys really on board with what the latest, innovations are, right? Like, let's go. I mean, the combustible engine is here. We're going to use it. Put the mules out the pasture because the combustion engine is here, and it's how we're going to get there, right? Like, that's the real decision that has to be made. But they've never been on the same page with their young pitchers, and seemingly have been behind whatever the current trend is in developing pitching.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I mean, the article talks about, I think the towel drill is another thing. It's like one of these old style, it was state of the art pitching development technology, and it was a white towel in like 1987. And I'm sorry, but it's not 1987 anymore. Other teams aren't doing it, but they're still clinging to their old ways. But the other thing is we talk about the denial factor here. The Royals, I feel like they keep crossing this line between defending their players, defending their, standing up for their people, which is good and admirable, and doing those same people a disservice by denying a problem. Like, if you have a friend who's, to extend the analogy again, if you have a friend who's an alcoholic, and your response is to defend him and to never, even bring up the fact that he has a problem, you're not being a good friend. And the Royals sometimes are not a good friend to their own people, to their own pitchers, because they are too busy defending them. And you bring up Asa Lacy. I want to bring up Asa Lacy from a different standpoint, which is, to me, the saddest thing, the most infuriating thing that the Royals have done with their pitchers this year was what they did with Asa Lacy. Let's review what actually happened to Asa Lacy this year. Asa Lacy started the year in the Double A rotation. All right. And he made 2 starts through 10 innings, walked 5 guys. Okay, that's not great, but 5 walks in 10 innings right now, you get down on your knees and say a prayer if he could walk 1 batter every 2 innings. He struck out 13 batters, allowed only 6 hits. I mean, it was a good, for a guy making his Double A debut.
It's still only 11 base runners in 10 innings.
All right. I think he did hit 2 batters. Okay, whatever. The point is, it was not dominant, but you could see the stuff was there. Okay, you'd refine the command. And then he had some back spasms. And he had, he was pulled from, I don't know if he was about to start, or he developed back spasms. They put him on the injured list, and he was actually out for a good 8 weeks. Back problems, not a great thing for a pitcher, but I'd rather it for a pitcher than a hitter, because the hitter's swinging the bat, the load of the bat. You've seen careers hitting a hitter's career destroyed by back problems. Randy Johnson was able to fight through back problems and become a Hall of Famer. So not the end of the world. It's not a great sign, but fine. He comes back after 8 weeks in rookie ball. All right. They put him out on the mound, and he makes 4 appearances. In those 4 appearances, he throws, I believe, 8 innings total. You got the numbers. Yeah. He faces 47 batters. He walks 14 guys out of 47 batters, also hits 5. So 19 of 47. So 40% of the guys he faces, he either walks or plunks. What would be your response to, the first round pick, the most talented arm in the minor leagues, who, started the year great, coming back from an injury, and suddenly is struggling in rookie ball, but not struggling in terms of his stuff or, even his results when batters make contact, but simply he's just not able to find the strike zone. Whatever your response would be, I can guarantee it would not be, no big deal, let's send you back to Double A. And that's exactly what the Royals did. Yes, rookie ball, he's probably not, like, his ability, he shouldn't be in rookie ball based on ability, but he's rehabbing. It's okay. I don't think you're going to crush Asa Lacy's confidence by saying, hey, Asa, we want to keep you in rookie ball. Nothing to do with your stuff. We just want to make sure that you're throwing strikes in a low pressure environment where we have all of our staff here in Surprise, and we just keep an eye on you. Let's just iron out your command, and then we'll send you back, and you can start dominating hitters at the upper levels. No, they just sent him to Double A. 14 walks in 8 innings, and back to Northwest Arkansas for you. You're just fine. The denial to do something like that is just astounding. And that's the point. As recently as 3 months ago, you and I were not talking about Asa Lacy as an abject lesson in, the Royals pitching development, as this complete bust. The Royals did him no favors by ignoring the problem, denying that he had a command issue. And now his career is kind of up in the air. And I feel bad for the guy because the Royals did him no favors.
Well, I think that, listen, all you got to do is say 3 years at Texas A&M. Kid hung a 2.07 ERA, through 152 innings. He walked 68. That's kind of high, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit high. He struck out 224. In 80 innings of minor league baseball, he has walked 83 and struck out 114. That Asa Lacy is the most damning evidence that the Royals they really have a problem. They either took the wrong guy by Lacy's, like you can get into, the fastball. I thought that was interesting. Okay, bad fastballs, right? Okay, they're looking at the wrong thing and taking the wrong guys in that 2018 draft. Everybody had Asa Lacy at the top. Everybody had him as the top pitching prospect. So they can't have taken this one. Can't be about grabbing the wrong guy. This one is about they have not been able to develop him. And you take a college pitcher. Now, again, the pandemic is an issue because in 20 he pitched for A&M. What did he? 4 games. Right is all he got. And then, in 21 he's and there's no minor leagues for him to pitch in and so on and so forth. But he should have been in the big leagues this year and been ready to be the top guy on your staff. Like, that's the timeline. That's how it's supposed to turn for a guy who's a college pitcher taken that high. And somehow he is completely lost. And I will go so far as to say that if they don't make a change with the front office this year, again, I don't think they're going to. If they don't make a change, the future may. And I had this debate, and I to this day can't figure out why Sam McDowell was debating me about it. I said, and I'll say it again. I said the future, whether or not this front office stays in its current position, may ride with Asa Lacy, because we know what's happened before now, and that's not the idea. Oh, so you're telling me if they won 102 games and Asa Lacy's not successful, they're out? No, dumbass. Follow the logic here. We've got a huge body of work of pitching that hasn't worked. They haven't been able to get Brad Keller going. They didn't get it done with Jacob Junis. Coar is drowning right now in his career. Brady Singer's the only one that's effective. Bubic got bombed again. Carlos Hernandez came in. He got bombed in relief. Right? Like it's like the whole.
Right. I was going to say, how appropriate is it today's game after Dayton's comments? Right. They lose 13-3. Bubic gets destroyed. Who else? Carlos Hernandez, who was a promising pitcher a year ago. Now, 7.97 ERA. Colin Snyder. Let's talk about another denial. Colin Snyder was added to the 40-man roster last winter. Just astounding that this guy. Really, I was just stunned. I'm like, who is this guy? He had I think a 6.5 ERA in AAA Omaha last year, 6.3. But they loved his stuff. Okay. All right, let's say he was going to pick. Well, this year, his ERA in the major leagues is 6.68. He was in Omaha earlier this year. He had 16 walks and 13 strikeouts. He had more walks than strikeouts in Omaha as a reliever this year. Why is Colin Snyder on the 40-man roster? I don't know. There has never been any reason for him, to be on the roster. And then finally, Luke Weaver, who they traded Emmanuel Rivera for. Rivera's come back to earth. Maybe he's not going to be an MVP candidate next year, but still a valuable rookie third baseman for a guy you've got under club control for a year and 2 months. Luke Weaver, 2 innings, 2 runs. He's got a 7.12 ERA with the Royals. I don't even see enough here to say they should bring him back on, as an arbitration eligible player for next year. Like, you make these comments, you deny that there's a problem, and then you go out and you give up 13 runs to the Red Sox. And like every pitcher who pitched for you poorly, the only guy we didn't mention, Jose Cuas, he's after Sinker, he's one of the better success stories in the organization, a side arming reliever. I like him a lot, great, but if that's your best success story after Brady Singer this year, you have some problems.
Right. And so my point is that, like, no, like if everybody else turns the corner and Asa Lacy is lost and goes Rick Ankiel, no, they're not going to fire everyone. But all this is not going to turn around. Right. That's my point. And so the current, the Brad Keller and and now you've got a positive in Brady Singer, and I do want to talk about that. You've got a positive in Brady Singer, but if you're looking and the guy who you stuck you made that first five picks in 18, and then you said, damn it, here we go again with Asa Lacy and other college, and you stick that flag in the ground and you announce drafting and developing power pitching is how we're going to get back. And if the guy that on that night you probably felt so confident that this guy can't fail, that you make that statement, and if you can't get him going right, yes, I think that is where the organization, an owner would say, that's it. I can go to, because I can't let you take another one of these guys because I can't trust in you. And I think, listen, thank God for the front office that Mazzucato started coming along. All right. Because I really think that may have been, if Mazzucato wasn't doing, and I probably should look, I haven't looked at him for a little bit. Please tell me he hasn't just nosedived.
Well, the low A ball season is over. The double A and triple A are still playing. So
right, but I don't think I've looked at him for a little bit.
No, his final start of the season, they pulled him in the first inning after he gave up like 2 walks, but it was his overall numbers. He finished the season certainly in trending in a positive direction.
Yeah, 89 Ks in 69 innings. We like that. We don't like how many base
51
runners.
walks or something. Yeah,
that's a problem. But at least there's power stuff there, and there was something positive. But I don't know how. Like the problem becomes as to what, if you're the owner, is how do I keep letting these guys draft if they're showing no signs of having any idea of what's going on. So, yeah, I felt like Lacy and Mazzucato really were, whether or not these guys were going to get another shot, it was on them. And I've always thought that they would be back. I really thought the Toronto thing with the firestorm that they got of heat there, and knowing that Dayton Moore has, just kind of where he's at, that might be something that would tip the ownership over. They survived that. They traded Whit Merrifield. Guys have come up. They seem to have been able to put that behind him, so that didn't end up being as big a thing. It was a very big thing at that moment, but I don't think it's going to have residual effects as we move forward. But the pitching part, like, it has to be fixed. And right now, there's very little signs. Brady Singer is the one positive, and I think you have to figure out, why is Brady Singer a success? We've had a couple of comments in here. Hell, they weren't happy with him. They sent him down to the minors. Well, let me just stand up and say, good, because it bought them an extra year. So let me say that was a success. That was a smart thing to do. Pitching him every game of a 60-game season and burning a year of service time that year was not a smart thing. I don't care who doesn't like it. And if you think, put Soren Petro's name on it, this is not, I will tell you, that was preposterous. Unless you were going to do what you did last year and get the year back. But donating a year to a 60-game season was ridiculous, right? That was just foolhardy.
I mean, it was ridiculous, but what was part of the ridiculousness was simply they were rushing these guys. I mean, one of the things the article talks about is that they rushed their pitchers through their system. To me, Singer is the headline because he got the full year of service time, but rushing Chris Bubich that same year, Bubich, spent like a week. They didn't actually activate him until like a week into the season, so he didn't get the full year of service time. But Bubich had never pitched above A ball, and they brought him up, and he actually pitched okay. And he pitched okay last year, but he's regressed. And again, it's like, was he a finished product? Did they really need to rush him, or were they trying to, show something for what they got in that draft? I think I don't have an answer there, but ultimately, they're not winning. Like, the results are what matter. And if they were winning, we wouldn't be having any of these questions. You said if they won 102 games, you and I would not have mentioned Asa Lacy's name on this podcast. We're talking about all these things because of the results. And the one other thing I want to bring up here is just how quickly the game changes. Like I don't want any of these comments um, to be construed as a criticism of the fact that the Royals won the World Series in 2015. Like they won, whether or not you call it luck or not is to me it's almost irrelevant. They won. They won 2 years in a row a pennant. They won a World Series. They won. But it's not simply. My point isn't that the fact that they won. Maybe they didn't deserve to win, or maybe that's not proof that they were a good front office then. My point is that the game has changed so much in the last 10 years, really even the last 5 years, that a good front office in 2015 is no guarantee of being a good front office today. I'll give you an even better example than the Royals. And this is something almost a little bit painful for me to admit. But I went to Wrigley Field yesterday with some friends to watch a ball game. I hadn't been to Wrigley in a couple of years. And before the game, I just was kind of looking over the Cubs, the roster, the results, and I, I had this uncomfortable realization. My God, the Cubs suck.
Yeah.
Like they're bad, and they don't even have a lot of young talent on that team. Like the most valuable player in that organization might be Nico Horner, who's their shortstop, who, by the way, was rumored that the Royals could have gotten for Whit Merrifield 3 years ago. I just want to put that out there, and didn't make that trade. And Nico Horner is a 4-win player playing shortstop right now. Wonder if we could have used a player like that. But regardless, it's a bad team, and the farm system is not that great yet. And what happened to that? The 2016 Cubs were not just one of the best teams of the decade, but really looked like a burgeoning dynasty. You had Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, and Anthony Rizzo, and John I mean, it was just chock full of talent. Well, what happened is something that's very familiar to you and I. They could not develop pitching, right? And we're talking about Theo Epstein here, Jed Hoyer, an incredibly well-regarded front office, and somewhere along the way, around the same time that teams like the Dodgers and Rays and Guardians were making massive changes to the way they identified pitchers and developed them, and using technology and shaping pitches. And the Rays come up with this reliever factory where everybody throws, they find 27th round picks who throw 97 with movement that looks like CGI. The Cubs stopped developing pitching. And after year after year after year of that, they're in a position right now. I'm not sure they're in a better position than the Royals are, frankly, for the long term. And that is an incredibly talented front office. But if you don't keep up with the trends, you can go from one of the best front offices to very mediocre in the span of a couple of years. And the Royals have not kept up. And that's what we're talking about here. This is not a criticism of the team that won a World Series. This is an acknowledgement that the game has left these guys behind.
Chris mentioned the statement. I like he said, this is a critical year for John Sherman. Seems like the only thing he cares about is a downtown stadium. I think that's completely unfair. There's nothing about being the owner. You're captaining a cruise ship. This is not a jet ski where you just, do donuts in the middle of the water. Like making changes at the ownership level is huge. And frankly, John Sherman ought to be focused on the stadium, and his baseball people ought to be focused on the baseball team. That's why he hires them. So, I mean, I hear where you're coming from, but I think that's wrong. But this one I think is interesting. Trusty Justy One said, not to be that guy, but look no further than Colin Snyder's pinned Twitter message to see why he's on the team. And when you go to Twitter, his pinned message is, quote, therefore don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will worry about itself, end quote. Matthew 6:34. There's a Bible verse there. This is a common one for Dayton Moore. And listen, I've covered a lot of players, and I've covered players that are not religious and are the kind of guys that are tough and like, man, that's the guy I want as my teammate. But I've covered guys that are religious and they are tough, and that's the guy I want as my teammate. I do not think that whether someone is or is not religious, which religion they have, how passionate they are about it, has anything to do with whether or not you're going to be a ball player, right? Or a good teammate or anything like that. But I will say this. To his point, not to be that guy. Why there's no reason for Colin Snyder to be on the team. So how could you? He wasn't good as Randy, you said last year in AAA. He hasn't been good in the big leagues this year. So how could a fan base be left with any other conclusion than that? Because there is no real reason, seemingly, for him to be on this team. And whether that's just purely coincidence or not, Dayton Moore has to look in the mirror. That organization has to look in the mirror. And this is again where I think that they started thinking they could do, like they had it figured out and they could do whatever they wanted. And you almost, like anyone who's on a roll in their fantasy teams, you start thinking, well, I grab a guy. If I grab him, he's good because I'm that good. And I think that's kind of where they got. And that's kind of the mindset they've had. And I think they've got to check it. And I think the other thing that I think is fair, and why I say the move with J.J.Piccolo maybe should have made earlier, is I do think Dayton Moore, he built a baseball academy, in Kansas City. He has a passion for the game. I think he felt like, I got this GM thing. I wonder. I don't know. But the results would say that he's been preoccupied or doesn't know what he's doing. I'd rather him have been preoccupied than not know what he's doing. Because if he is preoccupied with other things and he gets occupied with the baseball side, then you have a reason to believe that the man can fix it. But I think it's fair to ask, did he become more concerned with the legacy of the game in Kansas City and making people's lives better than winning baseball games? And that's a noble thing to do.
I was going to say, that's not a criticism at all. And
yeah.
if he's decided there are more important things to him than wins and losses for the Kansas City Royals, more power to him. Sometimes
Agreed.
I wish I felt that way, right?
Yes. But you can't be the guy in charge.
But then he should focus on those things.
Yes.
And let someone else. And I mean, if he walked away from the job after the season, like his legacy with the Royals and with Kansas City, I think is secure. The man won a World Series.
Yes.
Flags fly forever. We will never forget that. And I will always celebrate that team and what he did to put that team together. But if he wants to focus on other things, he should focus on other things.
And that's the question that has to be answered. And I think that's why J.J.Piccolo was bumped up. I think it should happen. Here's what I would offer as I talk about how long it takes to turn things in the right direction. But they knew this problem existed a year ago. And the first move was to bring J.J.Piccolo in. And if J.J.Piccolo is the answer, if he's going to be more critical of people in the organization, if he's going to be more open to the modern ideas, if he's more in tune with the modern ideas, as he made, in my opinion, the right move to let Terry Bradshaw go, we're not going to know that in the first 6 minutes he's on the job, right? The things that he will implement, he may not get the shot. He may be fired with Dayton. John Sherman may have a total house cleaning. I mean, a lot of times guys get into a position and they don't get the opportunity to Bill Kuharich engineered one of the best drafts in Chiefs history in 2008, right? It was loaded with Jamal Charles and Brandon Albert at left tackle, Brandon Carr, Brandon Flowers, 2 starting corners, and he was fired because the team sucked and they brought in Scott Pioli and outwent everybody. Bill Kuharich never got a chance. He had 1 year as the head of all personnel Carl Peterson carried the title GM, but he did the applicable things. Right. And he had a brilliant draft, and he was fired a year later because the ownership said, we got to have a new guy. And when Carl went, he went with him, and he never got a chance to put together the next couple of years and see what he could do. That may happen to J.J.Piccolo as well. But I will say this. It is possible that the decisions that need to be made have been made. We're not going to see the fruits of the labor. The pitching lab should have been built 4 years ago. They had the statement, well, for a small market club, we got to make sure it's the right thing. To which we've said that's almost battery and backwards. You've got to find the right thing first.
What is more cost effective? We talk about what is more cost effective: throwing money at free agents or throwing money at coaches. That's not even close. And also, like, the Royals don't actually have a pitching lab, but they sometimes borrow one.
They say they're building one.
They say they're building. Well, where are they borrowing one from right now? The University of Nebraska, correct? That's what I'm told. Like, if you're using one, like if a college can afford the lab, I think a major league organization can afford a lab. Like Vanderbilt has a pitching lab, and Vanderbilt's premier college pitching, but it's college. Like, every professional team should have the resources that more resources than a college baseball. This is not college football, basketball. College baseball, even the best programs are not going to be as well funded as a good as any major league organization. So, yes, they should have built a lab a while ago. But it's not just having a lab if you're not going to use a lab, if you're not going to actually bring in coaches who understand what that lab can do for you, and what using Edgertronic and high speed video can do, who can explain to the pitchers what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, can give them drills to make them better. I mean, the Royals, look, it wasn't what, 4 years ago the Royals sent Kyle Zimmer up to Driveline because they couldn't fix him, and Driveline, after 7 years of not being able to stay healthy, Driveline got Kyle Zimmer to the major leagues. And even though he didn't last for long there, the fact that he made it to the majors is an enormous success story. But how on earth is it that a private lab up in Seattle is able to get better results out of a pitcher, the 5th pick in the draft, than the Royals were? So yeah, there's a lot that needs to be done here. Is J.J.Piccolo the guy to do it? I don't know. If I were, to have John Sherman's ear, though, what I would like to say is, first off, it's completely understandable that he has been conservative to this point. Like, he bought this team, this ownership brought this team the end of the 2019 season, which I'm not saying there's ever a bad time to be an owner of a Major League Baseball team, but if there is a bad time, it was 4 months before a global pandemic shut down the sport. Like, I'm completely sympathetic to the fact that they bought a team that immediately became a cash sink for the first year and probably into the second year a little bit. So I'm sympathetic to the fact that they were, they bought a team and were immediately drowning in a situation that they didn't expect. And so the fact that they did nothing after 2020, they did nothing after 2021. I mean, I've said this before. I think they should have fired Cal Eldred last year. But I'm sympathetic to being deliberate, being conservative, especially through a very uncertain time, and waiting for the first really normal season that baseball has had since you became the owner. But we've had that season, and it's been an utter disaster. And the one good thing I can say about Cal Eldred not being fired last year is that it is clear now that the problems for this organization in terms of pitching development go beyond Cal Eldred. This is, again, it's not just a major league level. It is up and down the system. And, if they had let him go last winter and we were, in the same position today, it might be even harder to justify keeping everyone else around. But now it's very clear that the pitching side of things has to be overhauled top to bottom. And this is the winter. If you're John Sherman, this is the winter you have to do something. 3 years is long enough. I don't, I again completely understand the conservative, deliberate mindset up until now, but there's a point at which you have to do something. This is the winter to do it. And I'm not going to say you have to fire Dayton Moore. I'm not going to say you have to fire anybody. The individual decisions have to be made individually, but you have to make a sweeping overhaul of the way the organization conducts business. Pitching development, self-awareness, self-criticism, all of those things. It is time. It's been 16 years that this front office has been in place. That is an unbelievably long time. Dayton Moore, as the head of a baseball organization, is only exceeded in tenure by like Brian Cashman, Billy Beane. I think that might be it. Like, he is one of the longest running, and unlike in
And
most
to his credit,
organizations,
there are 2 pennants and a championship flag,
absolutely. But there's
which
also
is
3
something that
winning
Billy Beane
seasons.
does not have.
Right. But he has 3 winning seasons, and Billy Beane has,
Absolutely.
15 probably. And Brian Cashman has never had a losing season in New York. Yes, it's New York. I'm just saying the standards are higher, but 16 years is a long time for any front office. And it's not simply Dayton Moore. It's J.J.Piccolo has been essentially second in command for 16 years. If you look at the front office, it's in its entirety. You go to the Royals website and look at the people who are in the top positions on the baseball side. It's almost exactly the same names that were there in 2007. And that level of consistency was probably an asset in building those 2 championships. This front office that worked very well together and they all had a cohesive vision. They were all pulling on the same side of the rope, and it worked. But maybe it's become, after 16 years, maybe it's become a little bit sclerotic. Maybe it's become a little bit resistant to change. And change needs to be made, and I suspect change is coming.
Matt is always one of our best in the chat room. By the way, if you're catching us via the podcast, we stream live Sundays at 10 p. You can be a part of the Central Time. You can be part of the conversation in the chat room on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. Matt earlier said, listen, I share a lot of the beliefs that Dayton Moore does, but I honestly think that is a problem. And here's a guy that has, similar background. And he said, I'll disagree with Rany. I think you do need to fire Dayton Moore or make him resign. The message is stale. It's time to change the direction. Let's finish with that. I've always said, if not him, then who? Whenever you want to fire somebody, until your fan base says anyone, when that's the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're at that point right now that it's anyone. Matt does. Do you?
I don't want to sit here and say Dayton Moore should be fired, because I don't want the takeaway from this show is Rany Jazayerli says the Royals should fire Dayton Moore. I don't want it to become a question about a question about one specific issue, because this isn't about one man. This is about the whole organization. But I think it's very reasonable to ask yourself, can the organization make the sweeping changes that are necessary if Dayton Moore continues to hold the reins? My preferred outcome would be for Dayton Moore to not be directly involved in the day-to-day baseball decisions of this organization. And whether that means he is focused on, working with with Kansas City to develop the new stadium project, whether it is him being the Royals ambassador for some of his other projects in town, like the baseball academy and bringing baseball to the inner city, and some of the very admirable things that he's done. I think that there is a way for him to still be involved with this organization without making the baseball decisions, if that is a way to make his exit from the role, more, more comfortable for everybody involved. But if the Royals are not, if they're not going to just fire everybody, then I think an organization where J.J.Piccolo has the final say and does not have someone looking over his shoulder, the Royals would be in a better position if that were the case next year than if J.J.Piccolo is still reporting to Dayton Moore when it comes to what to do for the baseball team, for the draft, for transactions, etc.
I will not say Dayton Moore should be fired, but I will say that if there are not sweeping changes to the pitching side and the drafting side, the scouting and pitching parts of this organization, if there are not significant changes, and I don't mean a guy here or there, I mean significant changes. If Dayton does not have the plan, and if J.J.Piccolo does not have the plan, specific people he's going to target, new approaches, scouts, pitching folks, like, to me, that this last 3 months should have been all about that. Who are we targeting to hire? Then they will have to go. Somebody else will make the decision. I at that point, if they're not going to overhaul that stuff, then I will say yes, change needs to come.
I agree. Like I will not be upset if J.J.Piccolo is put in charge, but if the Royals make the decision, if John Sherman decides everyone needs to go, I certainly would not criticize that decision, and I will not. I don't have a leg to stand on to defend Piccolo against such a decision. It may not be fair to him, like I said, he's never really had the full opportunity, but I think, frankly, if I woke up to the news that everybody in the front office being fired and that John Sherman had targeted a specific, well-regarded, up-and-coming, general manager candidate from an organization that is on the cutting edge and has shown an ability to develop pitchers, I can tell you I'd be pretty excited if that were the case.
Yeah, no doubt. Rany, always great talking Royals baseball with you, and we will do it again next Sunday, my friend.
I look forward to it.
All right. We appreciate everybody joining us again. We stream live Sundays at 10 p.m. Central, and you can get our podcast wherever you find it. So for Rany Jazayerli, Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us.